right, folks. Welcome back to part 4 on our series of evolution by natural selection. Last time we spoke, we actually talked a bit about Charles Darwin and some specific case studies that show evolution in endemic species at the Galapagos. But it is important to note that these Galapagos tortoises, or the finches that he looked at, or any of the other organisms that Charles Darwin looked at on his 5-year voyage in the 1830s, are just some specific examples. It is probably more important then for us to look at evolution on a broader sense, right? To actually look at patterns of evolution over time and how they change populations. So today we actually have a pretty short little lecture. I just want to talk about the 3 main patterns that actually we see with natural selection. So how do populations change over time? That's what we're looking at today. There are 3 basic patterns. There's something called divergent evolution, convergent evolution, and parallel evolution. Now, of course, they all are similar in the sense that, of course, they're populations where the DNA in those populations changes over time so that they adapt to their environment. But how those changes happen is what we're going to look at. So the first one I want to look at is divergent evolution. And divergent evolution is actually sort of what we saw with the tortoises. So we're going to talk about that in just one second. But first, let me define it for you. So divergent, if 2 things diverge, right, what's happening is they're moving apart, right? They're moving away from one another. So divergent evolution is exactly what it sounds. It's where you start with one species, and then as those species inhabit unique environments, they start to develop traits and DNA, obviously, which codes for those traits that are unique to those environments to make them better suited to their environments. So, for instance, you can see divergent evolution here in this picture with the different limbs of different animals, right? From looking at a human arm here, or the leg of a horse, the leg of a cat, the wing of a bat or of a bird, and then even the fin of a whale. We know that these organisms are related, that they have a common ancestor, or did at one point, because they actually all have the exact same bones, which is very interesting, right? They're shaped a little bit differently, but the bones of these animals are all the same, which means that they probably evolved from a common ancestor, way back when. But as humans, became bipedal, stood up on 2 feet, we used our arms a little bit differently, so they got a little bit longer, as you can see. We also have opposable thumbs, which horses obviously don't. Horses adapted to their environment to have these really strong, heavily keratinized hooves that allowed them, to do a better job of running. Cats have very opposable fingers as well, but they're better adapted for, predatory jumping and whatnot. Bats obviously have very long digits, which allowed the wings to attach, that allowed them to fly. So all of these organisms, what we say is that they diverged. So if I grab my pencil here, I can explain that, I think, a little bit better, right? We had a common organism way back here in time, all right? And so they share a common bone pattern. But as the humans came and to adapt to their own environment, right? See, they're splitting. So we share a common ancestor, remember, but we split off from that common ancestor to occupy different niches. That's divergent evolution. You see divergent evolution in Pokemon too, but Pokemon's stupid. I hate Pokemon mostly because it gets evolution all wrong, right? In Pokemon, you're actually evolving your little monster. So Pokemon actually breaks the rules of evolution. I know this is kind of just a joke right now, but Pokemon breaks the rules of evolution because, remember, individuals cannot evolve, only populations can. So this is not possible. All right, so let me go back here. So that's divergent evolution. By the way, divergent evolution is what we saw with the tortoises as well. So if we go back here, if I pull up, go back to our last lecture, right? All of these tortoises likely shared a common ancestor, but as they adapted to different environments, they had to only the DNA, only the mutations where the necks were best suited to allow the tortoises to eat and pass on their offspring, ended up carrying through. On Hood Island, for instance, any tortoise that would be born with a short, stubby neck would starve and die, because remember, on Hood Island, if I pull this up here, just as a reminder from last time, they only had tall shrubs. They didn't have grasses on Hood Island, so you needed a long neck in order to survive to your reproductive years and pass your offspring on. But obviously, these things all share a common ancestor. They're all tortoises, for goodness sakes. The changes between them are pretty different. So at one point in time, they all looked probably pretty similar, and then they diverged as they occupied different environments. So that's divergent evolution. So now we're going to jump back to our little tree map here and talk about convergent evolution, because convergent evolution is actually sort of the opposite. So in convergent evolution, right, if two things converge, that means they come together. So these will be species that are actually relatively different from one another, developing similar traits over time because they occupy similar environments, not because they occupy different environments. Remember, with the last one, the environments changed, so even though they started from a common ancestor, they had to adapt different changes for their different environments. Now these, obviously, I mean, they have a common ancestor at some point, but these organisms couldn't be more different from one another. A shark, an ichthyosaur, which is like a dinosaur like fish, or a dolphin, right? This one's actually, this is actually, don't like this because a shark's not technically a fish. A fish by definition has a bony skeleton, but I didn't make this picture, I found it online. Sharks, though, have cartilage skeletons. Sorry, I keep accidentally deleting our descriptor there. Sharks have cartilage skeletons. Ichthyosaurs are reptiles, right, which actually do have bony skeletons, and mammals have bony skeletons as well, but mammals, as we know, have a lot of other unique characteristics. So these are very, very different organisms, but they developed similar traits, right? The traits that they developed actually started to converge with one another. So even though they're wildly different organisms in the animal kingdom, in that this one's a mammal, this one's a reptile, and actually this one is we call it a chondrichthyes, a cartilage fish, not a bony fish, which is what most people mean when they see the word fish. They all have fins, right? Because they're all adapted to swimming because they all live in the water. So that's how they converged. You'll notice in this photo as well, we see convergent evolution. These are very different, right? A pterodactyl or a pterosaur, a dinosaur that flies essentially, a bird and a bat are all different, right? They're actually all different orders of animals. We've got mammals again, reptiles, and aves, birds. But all of them fly because all of them occupy the similar environment in this case, which is the air. So that's convergent evolution. And our last one is usually the one that most kids get confused about, and that's parallel evolution. Parallel evolution is probably the most difficult for people to understand. So let me put the descriptor up here and then let me try to explain that. So remember, divergent evolution initially was when similar species occupy different environments and therefore develop different traits. We saw that with, again, the tortoises. Their different trait was that they developed totally different neck phenotypes. But what if we had a similar species like we did, if I go back to drawing that one more time, let me grab my pen, right? We had a common ancestor again, and then we branched to make 3 different species over time, right? But instead of developing different traits, what if they still developed similar traits even though they occupy different environments because the environments are similar? Well, we do see that. That's called parallel evolution. So parallel evolution is kind of combining divergent evolution with convergent evolution, right? So these species, a common ancestor probably looked a lot like these 3 that you're seeing here, but they went on to develop, they went on to inhabit different parts of planet Earth, but the parts of planet Earth that they inhabited, those environments, tended to be very, very similar, right? So we've got all 3 lagomorph species, which are all very similar to the rabbit that we see in North America. Or if you see here, right, all of these species, which you're going to learn a little bit more about in a different activity, the armadillo, the anteater, the pangolin, and the spiny anteater, They all evolved from a common ancestor, but since they all occupied very similar habitats, they evolved similar traits over time, parallel to one another. All right, so that's where we get the word parallel evolution. And actually, that is it for today. I just wanted to talk about patterns of evolution today. So, in a nutshell, remember, we essentially just said that all things demonstrate one of those three: divergent, convergent, or parallel. The key is to be able to compare it to similar or different organisms to figure out what that is. So these are all relative to one another. As always, if you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the comments, or you know how to find me, and have a wonderful day. Bye.